So again, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar series on carbon markets promoted by the Food and Agriculture for Sustainable Transformation Partnership, the FAST Partnership. My name is Giulia Galbiati. I'm a Natural Resources Officer in the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment of FAO. Where the FAST Partnership Task Force is sitting. This webinar came out as one of the priorities that the FAST Partnership members highlighted during the all members meeting we held in September earlier this year. The FAST Partnership operates across three pillars: access to finance, knowledge and capacity, and policy support and dialogue. So members asked for additional capacity building and knowledge creating sessions specific on carbon markets. So we're really happy to have with us and in the team now Ivano and Elena, who are carbon market specialists. They will now introduce themselves and they will walk us through today's session. The session is recorded and it will be made available on the FAST Partnership website, and of course also through you will receive a recap message with the material and the recordings as well. All right, we will have, we planned for a little bit of an interactive session. As mentioned, this came from a request from FAFTA members to work more on carbon markets. So we will use this session really to also gather your inputs on what you believe should be the topic that this webinar series should touch upon in 2026. So throughout the presentation, Ivano and Elena will show some questions through polls. They will appear on your screen and you can select and let us know what you believe are the most important topics or the blockages that you find in your work and working with carbon markets, and it will be taken into consideration to develop the full training material. In the meantime, I see more participants have joined. Welcome everyone again. I invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat so we can get to know you and see who is connected here today. And without further ado, then I would like to leave the floor to Ivano and Elena. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'm Elena Marchetti and I'm a carbon markets specialist in the Office of Climate Change and Biodiversity.
Hello everybody. Thank you for your time and for joining this webinar. My name is Ivano Senza, carbon market specialist here at FAO. As also just mentioned by Giulia, our role is based on an internal task force that will focus entirely on carbon markets. And now this is linked to obviously what we will see during this webinar. If you can go to the next slide, I will explain briefly what the journey of today will be. We will introduce carbon markets starting from basic concepts, because we also coming from requests, we realized that we have different levels of maturity, of course, when it comes to this complex interconnected ecosystem. So we will start by explaining those concepts and then how those relate to the Paris Agreement, so, Article 6.2, 0.4 and 0.8, and how that relates, of course, to NDC commitments, but without going too much into the technical details, because what we plan to do, and this is something we will share at the end, is to have specialized webinars for 2006, based also on your involvement and request, which we will gather both through this webinar and then also offline through survey that we will be sending out. So after the introduction, we will move on to some case example. We also have our colleague Roberta de Sousa, which has gently and kindly joined us today from Brazil to share a specific case example for forestry. We have a few other examples, so for agri-food systems that we would like to share with you and how those relate to carbon markets. And of course, having some information on opportunities and risks. And now those obviously relate to both farmer organizations and government policy, all of the relevant stakeholders, of course. And we will try, if possible, to have 5 to 10 minutes for questions, but feel free in the meantime to share through the chat any feedback or questions that you might have. Or if something is not clear to you, we'll be happy to clarify at the end or take it offline after the webinar. So without further ado, we'll like to start this session with a question to understand the level of knowledge that we currently have in the room. And if you can please have your comments as answer to this question. What is the level of knowledge regarding Article 6 and carbon markets in general? I mean, it can be either generic comment or also level of maturity, whether it's basic, intermediate, or mature, in relation to readiness and capacity building. But we'd like to hear from you. If you can please answer through the chat, that would be great. Thank you. And we'll read out some answers if somebody will enter some inputs there. I'll give you a few seconds to respond.
Thanks, Ivano. This is really what is going to, again, this was part of this discussion that we had during the members meeting in September. I'm going to give a little bit of background while participants can write their answers in the chat. And originally, the discussion that we had was we proposed to have carbon markets as part of the access to finance pillar, right? But then through the discussions, it came out that really what our members needed was a little bit more focusing on capacity building. So as mentioned, this is what we would like also to use this webinar for, kind of assessing what's the level of understanding if there's anyone who is already working on Article 6 carbon markets, so that we can understand also how to tailor exactly the sessions. I see that there are a few answers already, so back to you, Ivano.
Thank you, Julia. So we see that there is different degrees of maturity from the answers. So from basic understanding to intermediate, we also have some people that have already in a quite advanced stage or level of maturity. What we would like to and hopefully do is to increase that level of knowledge through this webinar series, which is starting today. And that is why we would greatly appreciate throughout the session and after to have as much feedback as possible on those gaps. But yeah, thank you very much for those who have answered already. Thank you. And we will start now. I hand over this to Elena to start with an overview on carbon markets, and then I will continue afterwards. Thank you, Elena.
Okay, so we're going to start with a very basic question, that is, what are carbon markets? So carbon markets are systems where carbon credits are traded. These credits represent a reduction or a removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So these are often bought by governments, companies, and even individuals in order to offset their CO2 emissions or to make a positive contribution. So here in this slide, right, I will put the laser pointer so that it's easier. Okay, so here we can see that there are two types of carbon markets. Here we have the voluntary carbon markets. Now, the voluntary carbon markets are those carbon markets that are not managed by a government. And so the credits that are traded within the voluntary carbon markets, they are all generated by a project that either reduces or avoids emissions from the atmosphere. So here in the graph, we can see that it all starts here. So with a project that generates negative CO2 emissions, that therefore generate the carbon credits that are then bought by companies whose CO2 emissions are above the limit, let's say. And so in order to compensate these CO2 emissions, they need to buy these carbon credits. While here for the compliance carbon markets, there is a body that sets a CO2 emission cap and issues tradable credits. So here we have a graph where we can see that there is a company that actually emitted less emission than its limit. And therefore, this company can sell more credits than what it needs. And therefore, the company sells these credits to another company that instead has excess emissions. And in order to compensate these excess emissions, need to buy these new carbon credits. So in the first case, in the voluntary carbon markets, participation is voluntary and any kind of sectors can be covered, while in the case of compliance carbon markets, participation is mandatory. So this means that all companies that are under the industries that are covered by these compliance carbon markets must engage in these carbon markets. And normally the sectors that are covered are the high emitting sector. So what are carbon credits? A carbon credit represents a verifiable unit of GHG reduction or avoidance from the atmosphere. So one credit corresponds to 1 ton of CO2 removed or avoided from the atmosphere. These carbon credits, as I mentioned before, they are generated by activities that reduce or remove greenhouse gases emissions. These credits, however, can be verified only once they have been verified by independent international standards. Examples can include Verra or Gold standard that we will later see in more detail. So carbon credits are normally used as a financial tool in order to encourage sustainable practice that can contribute to climate change mitigation. So here in this slide, we can see what drives supply and demand in carbon markets. So here on the right side, we can see how these carbon credits are actually generated. So there are 3 different types of crediting mechanisms that are either governmental, international, or independent. In the governmental ones, this means that the carbon credits, they are managed by governments. In the international ones, it means that they are managed by international organizations. An example is the UN agencies. The most famous example is PACM, that stands for Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, that we will later see in more detail. And then we have the independent crediting mechanisms that refer to non-governmental organizations, and examples are Verra or Gold standards. So here on the left, instead, we can see who actually buy these carbon credits. So the 4 sources of demand for carbon credits are domestic compliance. This often refers to all those companies that are required by law to buy carbon credits in order to achieve their climate targets. While then we have the international compliance. The main example is CORSIA. So maybe some of you already know what CORSIA is, but CORSIA was introduced by the Civil International Aviation Organization that basically requires airlines to partially compensate their CO2 emissions with carbon credits. So then we have NDC achievements. So this means that there are governments, example are Switzerland and also Singapore, that in order to achieve their NDC climate targets, they may need to buy carbon credits. Finally, there is the voluntary demand. So voluntary demand refers to voluntary commitments. In this case, they often come from private entities, such as corporations that want to reach the corporation net zero target. Okay, so here we can see an overview of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is fundamental for carbon markets. And later we will see why. So first of all, what is Article 6? So first of all, we know that within the framework of the Paris Agreement, all the countries must submit their NDC, where they basically have to self-determine their goals for climate change impact. And so Article 6 allows countries to cooperate between each other in order to achieve these NDC targets. And one of these cooperative approaches is carbon markets. Now, Article 6 includes 9 different subpoints. We are not going through all of them, but only through those that are important for carbon markets, and these are Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. So Article 6.2 allows countries to voluntarily cooperate to achieve their NDC targets by transferring mitigation outcomes that we will later see in the next slide are referred to as internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. Then we have Article 6.4 that instead it facilitates carbon credit trading via a UN supervised mechanism that is called the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, also known as PACM. That for those that knew, the Clean Development Mechanism basically is the new version of the Clean Development Mechanism. So here in this slide, we can see a clearer overview of the different crediting mechanisms under Article 6. So first of all, we can see that Article 6.2, there is a decentralized mechanism, because in this case, countries can choose to cooperate between each other by trading between each other these internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. In this case, the transfer, issuance, and registry of the carbon credits. So for these, it is the countries themselves that are actually responsible. While under Article 6.4, we have a centralized mechanism. It is called a centralized mechanism because it's all supervised by the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, that is the PACM that I showed you before. So in this case, the Article 6.4 emission reductions are traded. And in this case, it is the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism that is responsible for the issuance and transfer and registry of the carbon credits. Finally, 6.8 is not strictly related to carbon markets because, as you can see, it incorporates a non-market approach. So under this article, basically countries are able to cooperate between each other in order to achieve NDC targets, not through carbon markets, but through other types of activities that can be technology transfer or capacity building. So the NDC target achievement is linked to all of these Article 6 subpoints. Now I will pass the word to Ivano.
Thank you, Elena. So as we understand, there's a lot of information. For some of you, this might be complex, and as carbon markets is cross-cutting and interconnected, feel free to put any comments on the chat or afterwards if something is not clear. So we'll continue just to put more emphasis on Article 6 framework. We want to show you some examples so that you have some takeaways in terms of insights on how this mechanism works without going too much into the technical details. So as you can see from the left, as what Elena just described, there are 4 different types of crediting mechanisms with a specific purpose and claim type attached to each of them. But those obviously are needed to create the rules, the governance, the methodologies around the project development to generate the carbon credit, which is what Elena described just earlier. Once this process is in place, the government has potentially two different pathways that can be reached depending on the intent. So whether it's international, so access to carbon markets, or whether it's domestic, depending on the type of mitigation activity that should be authorized or not. And obviously there are rules and requirements behind this. We will briefly explain later on. Whether the path is international, you have multiple pathways that can lead either to obviously starting from a baseline authorization of the host country. You generate ITMOs, or International Transfer Mitigation Unit, that can be used for NDC transfer, and we will see that later how this corresponding adjustment concept works with a practical example. And obviously the pathway that leads to voluntary offsetting, which is mainly based on also contribution in the voluntary carbon market and to the private sector, and the Corsia scheme, which Helena just described for the aviation sector. The other pathway, which is doesn't need any adjustments or any corresponding adjustment, is a domestic market purpose driven and can also lead to, in this case, a non-market approach, results-based climate finance. And we'll see also later in this session an example in forestry of a results-based climate finance. Going into the next slide, this is the example. So bear with us, and I will guide you through. I know it can be complex seeing at first this slide, but I'll guide you through this example, right? Because it's very important for you to understand this concept and how this can be beneficial for governments when we talk about carbon markets, how it relates to NDC and Article 6. So starting from the fact that here we have the host country and the buyer country, both obviously with NDC targets. On the left, the host country has a conditional target that needs to be set, and then on the other side it's unconditional. But we have to bear in mind the business as usual scenario, and then what the host country is able to reduce, so domestic emission reduction possibility, given that this country has actual greenhouse gas emission of 60, let's call them 60 emission reduction units, as a potential compensation balance as positive, to be able to sell this as an ITMO, so 6.2, the example we've seen earlier, to an acquiring country which has a business as usual scenario of 110, can reduce by 20 units, but they have actually GHG emissions of 90. So they actually have to cooperate with countries that have the possibility to sell those units to be able to reach their goal. So this is obviously for them, sorry, I might have confused the two before, but for them, this is a conditional based on the resources that can be gathered from other countries. And here it's obviously unconditional. And on the next slide, it's even more explicit, where you can see that based on the CO2 emissions level over time, having a business as usual scenario compared to what a country can have from an unconditional and conditional point of view, this delta is the gap that the buyer country can acquire from an host country that has this potential, let's say, possibility to sell those emission mitigation units to other countries. I hope that this is clear, though it's complicated. We understand that, so please feel free to share any feedback in the comments if you want to deep dive further into this concept. But it's very important that you understand how this concept works. We have seen specific example for 6.2, and this is this process is in Belém at COP30 in Brazil didn't actually provide any new rules. There is already a lot of work that is going on methodologies and infrastructure. There have been some criticism on integrity and quality that needs to be addressed, but we are currently working on existing rules, just building on the infrastructure. So this is just to give you some latest updates, high level, of course, so we can deep dive into the details in another session. So this process works between a cooperative approach. Then we have the 6.4. 6.4 you might be more familiar with because the baseline instrument, the CDM, has been used already for many years. The successor, which is called PACM, is going to focus on high integrity, high quality carbon credits. And this instrument can be used also in parallel to 6.2 or as a unique channel for obviously governments, both in terms of compliance and voluntary carbon markets. The process behind this is that it's, in this case, centralized by the UN through a supervisory body. They're still working on the methodology to obviously improve on them and making sure that the concepts of integrity and quality are there, which weren't so much in the past, in the previous instrument, the CDM. So this has to be obviously worked on. In terms of the government's role, this is something that obviously is very important from a stakeholder point of view, so that you understand what responsibilities and which functions they have when it comes to carbon markets. And we have seen this through a number of requests already. Most of the gaps are currently on readiness level and capacity building. As you can see here, from an institutional perspective, from an authorization requirements perspective, and also very importantly, and we'll address this later on as well, is the benefit sharing and safeguards, which have to rely on robust and transparent mechanisms. And I always reiterate the point here, and it's because it's very fundamental, the carbon accounting aspects, which have to be addressed at already in the design principles of these mechanisms from a strategic perspective. Because that will be the baseline from a robust GHG inventory perspective to build then on your MRV systems, your governance, your institutional capacities. Because obviously it doesn't make sense to discuss carbon markets, although it should be designed from the original principles, when we don't have the the baselines. Obviously you cannot reduce what you cannot measure. We heard this quite a lot. So yeah, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we'd like to share a quick poll question now based on capacity building and knowledge gaps. So you'll see a window pop up in a minute. If you can please answer with maximum up to three answers, what could be your potential areas of interest to build capacities on? because as we said at the beginning, this will help us define and identify gaps which are currently experienced across the board, and also to help us define the next webinar series. I'll give a few seconds to respond. In the meantime, I'll check the chat. I see there are already some questions which we'll address. So what is ITMO? ITMO is international transfer of mitigation activity outcomes, international transfer of mitigation outcomes. It's the units which are generated from 6.2 to obviously for the cooperative approach is those units that we have seen in the previous slides that can be either sold or acquired through the cooperative approaches. So we will also share some glossary again on that. Okay, I see 15 people have replied to the question. Okay, I'll leave a few more seconds. Okay, I'll share results with you if you can confirm that you can see them. So we are seeing that most people, as you can see from those results, have replied that designing high-integrity carbon market framework is one of their top potential area of interest to build capacities on, followed by MRV systems, baselines, and transparency tools. And then following on understanding Article 6 rules and governance, national inventory report and biannual transparency reports. And then the last ones, we see some people responding for the rest, but mostly people responding those top 3 answers. We'll also share those results with you after the session. We will address the other questions that you have entered in the chat at the end, but for now, we will continue.
Okay, so now for the next part of our presentation, we're going to see why carbon markets matter in the agri-food system. Okay, so here we can see, first of all, that emissions coming from agri-food emissions contribute to 1/3 of global emissions, which makes agriculture a highly emitting sector. However, at the same time, agriculture has also the third largest sectoral mitigation potential that you can see here in this graph. So you can see that after energy and the forestry, there is agriculture with 14.5% of the mitigation potential across all sectors. So, however, despite its huge mitigation potential in the last approximately 20 years, among all the carbon credits that were issued under the voluntary carbon markets, only the 1% of these credits were agri-food credits. All of these figures are taken by an FAO report from 2025 that you can see here. It's called Agri-Food Citizens in the Voluntary Carbon Markets Status and Prospects, and you can simply find it thanks to this QR code.
Thank you, Elena. So addressing the types of, now we would like to deep dive a bit further into project development and case studies. So when it comes to the different technologies being used, and how those relate, of course, to agri-food systems and the AFOLU sectors in general, this can be divided into 4 different types: from renewable energy, nature-based solutions, which is where mainly we have agri-food system technology there, social impact, and tech removal. We have already some examples that have been developed either from a capacity building and readiness perspective, either at jurisdictional level or at project level. We'll see some examples later on. But what Elena said in the through the VCM report in the earlier slide, and what's really important to reiterate is the fact that there is a huge opportunity here for governments to take the lead on applying as part of their AFOLU analysis in terms of mitigation potential projects, whether jurisdictional or project-based from a voluntary carbon market perspective or from a results-based payment perspective, the mitigation outcomes that are that could be beneficial towards the NDC. So coming back to NDC and Article 6, here there is a huge potential for agri-food system and to be beneficial towards the NDC commitment of the countries. And we have already quite a lot of methodologies from the voluntary carbon market, which can be obviously used from a compliance point of view, and that are currently being looked at from PACM, the 6.4 as well. And in this slide, you will see that the different types of sectors are divided basically mainly from a reduction or removal point of view. When we talk about, where you see in the middle, agri-food system, and also on the left for forestry, all forestry related activities that can generate carbon credits. And then on the far right, examples such as clean cook stoves and reducing food waste. And if you can move to the next slide, please. When it comes to dividing such sectors according to the type of crediting mechanisms, so where you see at the top, from the left, we see the CDM, which is going to be the new PACM 6.4 instrument. We see how this is being addressed currently. On which sector is being addressed. And then you will see in the middle, the voluntary carbon market methodologies, which are mainly BERRA, gold standard. And then towards the end, Article 6, from the, which is going to be the PACM, the different types of methodology and project types, which are currently there to be used for project development. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through now some examples of cases on carbon markets, agri-food systems. These are not exhaustive. Obviously, what we plan to do is to share other case examples across different regions. We selected, for example, this one on rice methane mitigation because it's from an FAO perspective, we have building very high technical expertise on this tool and also on the research and development part. And to show you what can be done across the regions and what benefits it can bring, not just from a mitigation perspective, but also how those activities can be bringing also adaptation activity. And one of them obviously is resilience to farmers, ecosystem services that benefit not just obviously the major stakeholder, which has to receive the benefit of the carbon credit revenue, but also the local communities and last but not least, the governments that have to account for those mitigation activities towards their NDC. Why, in terms of who invests, and I will leave it over to Roberta, who invests and why, it's important to understand, where, as we said at the beginning, where do we get the demand from? And the demand is mainly coming from either, as you can see from this example, corporations, so the private sector, that need to decarbonize supply chain. So here we're talking about also insetting, so value chain projects that can generate reduction, mitigation activities, but at the same time can generate also carbon credits. Obviously, governments, developing agency, NGA support because this improves food security and other ecosystem services which are vital for those communities. And last but not least, investors obviously value those projects because of the resilience that it brings to the entire food agri-food supply chain system. Now, along this the next slide over to Roberta de Souza, who has kindly joined us to share an example for the forestry sector. I'll hand over to you, Roberta. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. My name is Roberta de Souza. I am a specialist in carbon markets for the FAO Halting Deforestation team and the UN RED program. And my team, we work with a broad range of financial opportunities for forests that are also very relevant to agri-food systems. And these include both non-market and market finance. So I brought here only two examples because they are very up to date and we are also very excited about them because things have been moving. And so the first one here on the left is in Uganda, which is now the first country in Africa to have been granted with RED Plus results-based payments from the Green Climate Fund. So for those who are not familiar with the term RED Plus, it stands for reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, with this plus standing for additional activities that protect the climate. So this can be sustainable management of forests and conservation and enhancement of carbon stocks, which also include, for example, agroforestry activities. So under the Paris Agreement framework that we just heard about, countries that develop RED Plus activities and have their results verified can receive results-based payments as an incentive for their efforts. So this is under Article 5 of the Paris Agreement, so it's very closely related to Article 6. Why? No, because although it's a no-market scheme, it also uses carbon as a measure, a unit of measurement to calculate the payments. So although it fits under this perspective that Ivana was talking about, it fits Article 6.8, so no market perspective. And the GCF has the mandate, the Green Climate Fund has the UNFCCC mandate to pay for these results from the part of the Paris Agreement. So in case of Uganda, Uganda has avoided the emissions of more than 8 million tons of CO2. These were results that were translated into $31 million. So although we may think, no, conservation of forests has nothing to do with agrosystems, food, but if you look at the co-benefits, and we know that there are obvious synergies, but if you look as the proceeds will be reinvested in the country, you see agroforestry, climate smart agriculture, small woodlots, restoration, and also capacity building at the institutional governmental level. So although the proceeds, the results come from deforestation, the proceeds can be used for agro-system if they are in the country's RED Plus strategy, okay? The countries have to develop their strategies or action plan, and, for example, to identify that agriculture is a major driver of deforestation. So when it decides to work on this driver and to bring more sustainable forms of agri-food systems, then it can use the proceeds for this. So there you can see that FAO is an accredited entity of the GCF that so far has secured more than $200 million to 5 different countries of result-based payment for REDD+. And so this is one example of secured upfront finance for the carbon perspective. It's a carbon finance, although it's not no market carbon finance. The next example is very different. We are not working in Zambia this time, not to secure finance, but to create an enabling environment for the healthy and responsible carbon market to develop. So mainly which concerns forest-dependent communities and farmers. So Zambia has a fast-growing voluntary carbon market, many voluntary projects being developed, but it has also evolved its legal frameworks, and now is starting with a jurisdictional REDD+ program. So our country team, FAO country team in Zambia, noticed that this has been impacting forest-dependent communities a lot. So we decided to study what was going on and to ensure also that this impact was positive in balance. No, we know there are negative impacts and positive impacts, but the overall balance should be positive. So we've been going to the field. We've been talking to 4 players of the market, 4 categories of players. So carbon project developers, governmental agencies involved in the carbon space, and civil society organizations and communities, the farmer communities. And by now, we still don't have the results, but we've seen one thing that was very clear is that there is a need for continuous dialogue in this environment between these 4 players. So in a fair and representative way. There are very highly qualified and well-intended voluntary initiatives in the country, and they have a lot to contribute with the development and implementation of regulations as well. So the voluntary carbon market has some very valuable lessons to share, just because it's very mature at this point, mainly in REDD+. As Ivano showed, you've seen that the forestry sector has been very active in the voluntary carbon market. So, and the government, as Ivano showed as well, has a very important role to play, especially under Article 6, and especially to regulate the market and to preserve the livelihoods of farming and rural populations in the country. So all these recommendations will be soon developed, compiled, and made accessible in a very easy manner. We can share with you later for those who are interested. And what we can do in terms of carbon finance for forests. There are many other examples and opportunity that we can talk in the next opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. I think the keywords there are enabling conditions and environment. Absolutely, we totally agree, and that's where also we are supporting countries at the moment, in parallel, obviously, with other activities. Thank you, Roberta. Next slide. So just quickly, before we wrap up, just to deep dive a little bit further on understanding how the different types of project developers, how they are involved, and where from which perspective farmer organizations are involved in this process as one of the main stakeholders for the project lifecycle. As you can see from the left, we have several types of project developers. They're all very important stakeholders. First, previously we were discussing about the government role, which you also see here at the bottom. What we want to stress is that project development, whether it's a jurisdictional, project-based, on the path to compliance or voluntary carbon markets, so ITMOs or contribution unit, needs to address, first of all, the communities and the stakeholders which need to be involved in the first stages of this life cycle. And that's why you see them listed here. The indigenous peoples and local communities, on top of the experts that allow this enabling environment to take place with both MRV technology and also the technical expertise on carbon modeling, with the experience that have been built on the ground with the methodologies that drive high integrity and high quality projects. But we'll deep dive further on those elements in other sessions. Next slide, please. So in terms of opportunities and risks for agri-food systems, going back to the previous slides on the different paths of the Article 6, we are highlighting here for you where we see the risk coming up that should be addressed, considered, obviously reduced and avoided when it comes to either authorized mitigation outcomes on the left for Article 6.2 or 6.8, and whether it's a non-authorized through voluntary approaches, results-based climate finance, domestic, or contribution to the reduction emissions by and at host party level. On the left side, there is an overselling risk that you see below, we highlighted in blue, and that will be addressed when it comes to high integrity and quality on the additionality, permanence, so risk management, MRG systems, leakage, all of the elements that are safeguards and ways for us to address how quality and integrity should be implemented with obviously local communities and indigenous people in mind, but without overburdening the process to a level that bureaucracy and paperwork would become such a burden to actually become even a deterrent for the people that should be in the first place be helped by the carbon crediting system. So then in general, what you see also in this slide, and I just would like to highlight the top points that we like to address as risks. We see that quality and integrity is super important, and this is also being addressed in the COP to COP process. Greenwashing on the buyer side for private companies, using the right claims to avoid greenwashing the consumer. The elements of additionality, permanence, as we said, are super important. And then when it comes to harm to communities and harm to environment, again, we would like to address that FAO's mandate is obviously in a position to have this as a fundamental element of its carbon market strategy when it comes to readiness and capacity building. So those enabling conditions that also Roberta was mentioning earlier have to have at the heart of this process those two elements, which obviously are interconnected. Next slide, please. I'll let Elena now go through advantages and disadvantages, and we will we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I'll be very quick for these last two slides. So engaging in international carbon markets can offer key advantages. So first of all, carbon markets can mobilize public and private finance for climate action. At the same time, they can create development benefits that can range from new jobs to healthier ecosystems to cleaner air. Moreover, engaging in carbon markets also creates revenue streams that countries can reinvest in local communities and low carbon development. Participation in carbon markets also drives innovation with knowledge transfer. And finally, carbon markets are extremely beneficial for developing countries with low cost emission reduction opportunities. However, of course, engaging in international carbon markets also brings important challenges that need to be addressed. So, first of all, there is the need to prevent social or any environmental risk. So, any carbon market activity needs to be aligned with national development priorities. Moreover, countries need to balance the international credit demand with domestic need. A crucial challenge, as already mentioned before by Ivano, is the reputational risk that often comes from low integrity creating activities. And finally, in order to address all of these challenges, a strong institutional capacity is required, from solid regulation to reliable MRV systems and a strong stakeholder engagement. So over to you, Ivano, again.
Thank you. So as we wrap up this webinar, we wanted to give you just a final hint as to what next steps should be, as I've seen from requests and projects that we are currently addressing worldwide. And these are kind of the first steps, enabling activities that will allow you to have the building blocks necessary for Article 6 readiness. So obviously the strategy is crucial to start with, and that is obviously followed by arrangements related to the authorization processes, ITMO generation and transfer. So again, registry and MRV readiness, and then everything that is related to assessments that go beyond carbon, sustainable development assessment, and what the entire carbon market ecosystem can bring, both from crediting mechanism, and also from the type of sector and mitigation activity that should be addressed, obviously tailor-made to each country's needs. But we are not going to go into the details for this because we'll have a session dedicated to it. Just as final takeaways that we would like to take with you before we answer some of the questions that are currently being written in the chat. So countries need, of course, specialized support. This is very complex, interconnected, cutting across regulations and competencies, but require an integrated approach. So at FAO, we have obviously identified those needs. We have started developing, as also Roberta was saying, in the forestry sector, but also in all agri-food sectors, projects that can help create those enabling environments and start increasing the level of readiness and capacity building. Carbon accounting, and I will repeat this also in future webinars, is crucial because as we also stated, we cannot start this process without having a strong and robust GHG inventory process that is obviously linked to the NDC commitment and target. And that will become the enabler for the carbon market ecosystem to take place. And then engaging early. That would be the kind of the key terminology, keywords that are super important for the risk management process. And then to finalize next steps, we would like to send you over all of this material, additional reports that can act as enablers. And we would like to also share with you soon what will be the next webinar series for 2026 based on also your feedback. So please get involved. Please let us know where exactly you need more help in terms of readiness and capacity building. And we will try to address that during those webinars. And the last but not least, there will be a survey that will be followed. Yeah, if you agree, we will start answering the questions from the chat. We have 10 more minutes exactly, as we have the webinar planned for until 5:15 Rome time. So we'll start from the top. While I answer some of the questions, Elena, if you want to also join me and answer them, feel free to step in. So the first one is there any relation between UN regulated 6.4 and voluntary carbon markets, and do they compete in any way? So great question from Nube. So indeed, 6.4 as it's a successor of the CDM that was already competing in the voluntary carbon market with other registries such as Vera, Gold Standard, Plan Vivo, is indeed part of the process. But this new instrument will be an high integrity, high quality instrument that will be also linked to the authorization process. So this brings an additional element that other registries are not competing with, because it comes from I would say, a jurisdictional compliance point of view, which will be interesting to see how it's being developed further. And obviously also this is currently evolving, so stay tuned, because we will share feedback on this tool as well. The next question, there is one from Fabio about the adoption of core standards developed in 2025 by Article 6.4, the supervisory body, in terms of additionality, leakage, baseline setting, non-permanence, and many people see the standards difficult to apply in AFOLU and other MBS solutions due to complexity of permanence rules, reversal risk management, data requirements. Any views? So yeah, absolutely. These are issues that are being addressed currently. They are the issues that I was mentioning to you earlier about the infrastructure that is currently, and the criticism that the current methodologies are currently receiving on the 6.2 and 6.4 developments. So there is the potential there, the opportunity to address those issues to improve on integrity and quality elements. And these are totally, we are totally agree. These are complexities and difficulties which are currently there in the market, and which also prevent access for, I would say, also small farmers, a very fragmented sector. We will be showing some solution and projects that are currently being developed that can be scaled with the right methodology. An example is the Plan Vivo one from a project development point of view. But it's true that those elements are currently, they need to be considered. It should be part of the risk management process. It's definitely part of the risk that we have shared also with you in this webinar. Thank you for the question. Elena, feel free to, if you want to add anything. Then the next one is by public entities. You also mean agricultural public development banks. Can PDBs play a more enabling role as they are an extension of the government on carbon markets? So absolutely, it's banks, financial institutions, in this case, can definitely play a role. In this case, the public development bank, as part of an extension of the government, can definitely become an enabler and also an advocate for carbon markets. Obviously, those banks have customers, so the link between the private sector and the public sector, we have seen already when it comes to carbon markets that is definitely an enabler. So absolutely. Obviously, then when it comes down to how and in which way do we engage the stakeholder process for this public-private partnership, that will depend obviously on specific needs, requirements of the specific government. And then we could definitely discuss this further, but absolutely is a stakeholder that can definitely be involved. Next question on safeguards and participation by stakeholders from Christian, such as farmers organization, is also a key issue that is a risk from their perspective if not done correctly and thoroughly. Yes, absolutely. This links also to the previous point on risk management with the specific focus on stakeholder engagement. So here the keyword that I see is participation in safeguards. As I said before, we need to have the right governance in place that has already those communities, indigenous groups, being already taking part in the decision-making process already from the start, at the early stages, at the earliest possible. So my answer to this question is obviously for now very high level, but it's there are definitely elements there that should be explored obviously further. Don't know if you want to add anything here, Elena, or?
No, I think you covered it all.
And then there is another question.
Yeah, that one was before.
Okay. Where we can see who is selling and buying credits from the different markets and prices. So there are already sources out there that we can make available to you. One of them is an ecosystem marketplace that provides quarterly and annual report on who buys and sells from a sectoral point of view. We will share also, because it's also public data, information on this, and you will also find a very relevant information about this question on the VCM for agri-food system report that was developed by us recently. And you will find the QR code in the slides as well. But yeah, there's definitely information out there that we will share with you if this helps you address carbon markets. Okay, so we are on time. Still, we have 3 more minutes. If you have any more questions or comments, feel free to write in the chat or unmute yourself, and we will be happy to answer it. Also, if you have any comments also related to the webinar or expectations on the next webinars, please feel free to share here or also offline through the survey link that we will be sharing with you soon. We leave 1 more minute, Julia, if you agree, if nobody has more questions, and I say we can wrap up.
Absolutely. So thanks a lot, really, Ivano, Elena, and Roberta for this fantastic presentation. It's clear I'm not the only one thinking it was a very good session. We have very positive feedback in the chat. As Ivano just mentioned, feel free to send any follow-up question or things you thought about it maybe later after we close the webinar. You still would like to come back on a specific topic. Feel free to reach out to us. we will share the recordings and the material developed and shared today with you. They will be also posted in the FAST Partnership website, especially the recording. And again, the information and the inputs that you shared today will really shape then how we will organize the webinar series in 2023.